Your favorite war movie would get you killed in minutes. The lone warrior dueling his way through enemy ranks, the cavalry charge smashing walls like paper, the archer hitting every shot with perfect aim, not the movie version. Here's what you're really going to see. First, formations that trapped you shoulder to shoulder in crushing lines. Then, the ugly logistics that starved more soldiers than swords. Finally, the raw psychology that made men freeze, break, or run when death closed in. This is what war actually looked like, and it is nothing like your screen. You did not fight for glory. You fought to survive. Dust burned your lungs, sweat blinded your eyes, and terror gripped your hands tighter than your weapon. Not the movie version. Next comes the tactic films never show how formations truly worked. Movies tell you battles were duels. A lone hero cuts through crowds, blades flashing in perfect rhythm, until the rival stands before him. Not the movie version. Real soldiers fought locked together, bodies pressed, lives tied to the line. Step out of it. You died. Stay in it. And you became one cog in a grinding wall of shields and spears. First, imagine the Greek phalanx. Your shield overlaps your neighbour's. Your spear points forward, part of a bristling hedge. You cannot swing wide. You cannot step free. Men behind shove against your back, driving you into the roar ahead. A stumble means a spear finds your chest. Not the movie version. Victory came from endurance, not elegance. Then, look at medieval Europe. The shield wall echoed the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, breath hot on your neck, sweat dripping into your eyes. You jab blindly into gaps. The wall held until it cracked. Once a breach opened, fear rushed in, and the line collapsed. By the late Middle Ages, pike squares bristled like hedgehogs. Hollywood loves a lone rider smashing through. In reality, the first row of pikes impaled him before he came close. Even if one broke through, dozens more ranks waited. Not the movie version. The essence was the push. Armies pressed until exhaustion, morale, and fear decided who broke first. Your body screamed, lungs burned, legs slipped in mud. Strikes mattered less than nerve. A formation shattered not by kills but by one man dropping his shield, then another, until panic spread like fire. History's great victories came from these cracks. At Hastings, a single breach opened the English line. At countless fields, Viking shield walls dissolved when courage buckled. Not the movie version. Wars were not won by heroes, but by formations holding a few seconds longer than the enemy. But formations were only as strong as the men inside. Empty stomachs, parched throats, and disease broke them before combat even began. A phalanx meant nothing when soldiers staggered from hunger. A pike square crumbled when sickness hollowed the ranks. Next comes the unseen killer that destroyed armies before swords ever crossed logistics. Your screen tells you war was decided at the clash. Blades, charges, fire raining from the sky. Not the movie version. Most wars were lost before the first strike. Here's the real sequence. First, supply lines. Then, starvation and disease. Finally, sieges that crushed cities without a single breach. If you ignore logistics, you ignore the battlefield that killed more soldiers than swords ever did. Every army lived on wagons, animals, and food, stockpiled mile after mile. You could not feed thousands by raiding villages. Crops ripened once a year, and peasants barely grew enough for themselves. Without steady shipments, an army dissolved into a mob of starving men. Not the movie version. More died in camp than in combat. Hunger, thirst, and filth claimed them. In the Crusades, men collapsed under desert suns, lips split, horses dead in the sand. In northern campaigns, autumn rains swallowed wagons in mud, leaving soldiers chewing leather to trick their stomachs. Commanders knew this. The fastest way to win was to cut supplies. Raiders burned wagons, poisoned wells, slaughtered animals. A single convoy lost could doom an entire army. Rome mastered this unseen war. Legions built roads and depots not for glory but survival. Alexander's campaigns stretched supply chains like threads across continents. He won battles because his men had bread when others did not. Siege warfare made logistics brutal. On screen, walls fall to ladders and fireballs. Not the movie version. Most sieges were strangulations. Armies starved inside while armies outside rotted in mud. Defenders gnawed rats, boiled shoes, and begged heaven. Months passed before gates opened, not to victory but to surrender from hunger. Starvation, not swordplay, decided most strongholds. Even when formations looked strong, logistics hollowed them out. The phalanx you picture as unstoppable? Useless if men fainted before contact. The shield wall? Worthless if half its ranks coughed with fever. At Agincourt, English archers stood sick and starving, yet French supply failures forced a clash in mud. Terrain and hunger weakened knights more than arrows did. To the common soldier, this was war, dragging wagons through swamps, hauling water skins across burning plains, watching comrades collapse without a blade in them. Every march was a gamble against distance, weather, and time, not the movie version. The greatest generals were not only warriors but managers of bread and beasts. They won because their men ate while the enemy starved, but even a full stomach could not silence the pounding heart. Hunger could be solved, fear could not. Next comes the battlefield's most ruthless weapon, the human mind. Movies tell you warriors charged fearless, blades steady, eyes cold. Not the movie version. The real enemy was inside the helmet, the terror that seized your body before steel ever touched you. Here's how it broke you down. First, the senses. Then, the hesitation to kill. Finally, the collapse of whole armies when fear spread like fire. This is the war your screen never shows. Step into a line and feel it. Dust chokes your lungs, sweat blinds your eyes, metal bakes under the sun. Around you, a storm of screams, horns, drums, the crunch of bone. Your grip shakes, your breath catches, every instinct begs you to run, not the movie version. Most men froze. Studies centuries later showed muskets loaded and reloaded, never fired proof soldiers could not strike. The same was true with swords. Steel in hand did not erase the barrier in the mind. Training existed to burn hesitation out, drilling thrusts until they became reflex. Romans hacked at posts, knights fought mock battles, all to force the body to move when the brain stalled. Even so, terror never left. Fear cracked men in different ways. Some locked up, unable to raise their arms, others slashed wildly, missing every target. A few channeled panic into reckless fury, but fatigue always followed. The longer you stood, shoulder jammed into shields, the more the mind frayed. One soldier dropped his weapon, then another. Panic raced down the line. Armies collapsed without a single blade cutting them down. History proves it. At Marathon, Persians fled long before slaughter. At Gaugamela, Alexander's cavalry struck terror greater than their swords ever did. Viking sagas record walls of shields giving way not from wounds but from faltering courage. Men broke not because they all bled, but because they could not endure another heartbeat of waiting. This is why survival rarely meant bravery. Most fought not as heroes but as survivors. They swung because comrades pressed them forward, or because commanders threatened them from behind. Not the movie version. Calm, fearless warriors are myths. The reality was trembling hands, dry mouths, pounding hearts, and desperate prayer. And fear turned cruel when weapons and armor failed expectations. Imagine realizing your sword barely pierced. Imagine your armor crushed inward, ribs snapping beneath the steel. The myth of invincibility dissolved, and with it, morale. Fear met futility, and battles ended in chaos. Next comes the ugliest revelation. Weapons and armor themselves were never what movies promised. Your screen crowns the sword, gleaming steel, duels in the dust, heroes trading perfect blows, not the movie version. The sword was not king, it was the sidearm of elites, rare and costly. Here's the truth you never see. First, common soldiers fought with spears and axes. Then, swords proved brutal but ugly in use. Finally, combat manuals show wrestling and grappling, not dance-like duels. Spears ruled the battlefield. Cheap, long, easy to use, they turned farmers into fighters. A line of bristling points held cavalry at bay, skewered charging men, and kept formations intact. Axes, bills, and polearms came from the tools of labour. A woodcutter's swing became a lethal strike in war, not the movie version. The sword was expensive. Forging one took skill an iron few could afford. Knights and officers wore them as marks of rank, not standard issue. To carry a sword was status, not survival. The common levy often marched without ever touching one, and when swords were used, they were not graceful, they were vicious. A short thrust to the gut, a chop at the neck, a pommel slammed into a face. Surviving manuals teach throws, trips, and grips as much as cuts. Swordplay looked closer to a street fight than a stage duel. Even the longsword, the darling of fantasy, was no spinning blade. Fighters gripped it halfway down, half swording for leverage. They used it to pry at armor joints, not to whirl in wide arcs. Those flourishes you see on screen? They would have gotten you killed in seconds, not the movie version. Battlefields left no room for elegant duels. Mud sucked at boots, smoke stung eyes, men shoved shoulder to shoulder, hacking fast and low. The survivor was not the flashiest, but the quickest. Opportunity, not choreography, decided kills. Other weapons did more work. Spears killed more men across history than swords ever did. Polearms dragged knights from saddles and split helmets. Maces and hammers crushed through steel where swords bounced off. These were not pretty tools, but they finished fights. So why the myth? Because the sword symbolized power. Kings carried them in coronations, knights swore vows on them, poets sang their names. The battlefield crowned the spear, but memory crowned the sword, not the movie version. And if weapons are misunderstood, armor is warped even more. On screen, knights stride like walking tanks. In truth, armor was compromise, weight, and heat. Next, the burden of protection that movies turn into fantasy. Chapter 6. Armor and Protection. Heavy Truths. Your screen shows knights gleaming in steel, swords bouncing off their shells, men striding untouched through chaos. Not the movie version. Armor was never invincibility. It was compromise. Here's what really happened. First, most soldiers wore padded cloth or mail, not full plate. Then, armor protected against cuts but failed against crushing force. Finally, the real killer was exhaustion, not blades. The average soldier wore a gambeson, thickly quilted and heavy with sweat. Those with money added mail, a mesh of rings that resisted slashes, but sagged with weight. Only the richest knights could afford plate, and even then, few owned full suits. Not the movie version. Armor worked, but only partly. A sword slash might glance off. A spear thrust might skid aside. Yet a mace caved ribs beneath. A hammer dented helmets until skulls cracked. Protection dulled edges, but force still broke bodies. Then came the toll on you. Heat swelled inside padded layers. Sweat poured until eyes stung. Helmets narrowed vision to a slit. Breathing turned shallow. A few minutes of combat felt like hours. Even trained knights staggered under strain. Fatigue felled men as surely as steel. Movies love to show armor as slow, statues shuffling in battle. Not the movie version. Good plate spread weight so evenly you could run, mount a horse, or swing freely. But agility was bought with limits. March all day, fight in heat, and the body still collapsed. Flesh never matched metal. Armor also revealed inequality. A knight glimmered in steel. A levy wore cloth and prayed it held. On the same field, one man could survive 3 blows while another fell to 1. Protection was never equal. The poor bled first. Weapons evolved to counter it. Poleaxes hooked and hewed. Maces and hammers crushed through. Knights grabbed each other, wrestled, and shoved daggers into visor slits. Manuals taught joint locks as often as sword cuts. Not the movie version. Armor shifted fights from cuts to grapples, from duels to brutal close contact. And arrows? They rarely bounced off like sparks. A heavy shaft pierced gaps or skewered horses. Kill the mount, and the knight lay helpless in mud. Armor never erased vulnerability. The myth of the untouchable knight lives on because it dazzles. Shining steel looks cinematic, but real armor was hot, heavy, and exhausting. It saved lives but ruined bodies with fatigue. It was never a tank. It was a trade-off. And even with weapons and armor, survival often depended less on steel than on the field itself. Movies stage battles on perfect fields, armies charging across flat plains, sky clear and bright. Not the movie version. Real war was fought on ground that betrayed you, in weather that broke you, at moments chosen to ruin you. Here's how it shaped every fight. First, terrain turned order into chaos. Then, weather stripped armies of their edge. Finally, timing made victories before weapons even clashed. Terrain was never neutral. A river behind you meant no retreat. A hill ahead gave archers the high shot. Forests shattered cavalry into stumbling confusion. Mud dragged at boots until formations dissolved. You imagine sweeping maneuvers. In truth, men slipped, tripped, and drowned in ditches they never saw. Agincourt proves it. French knights, heavy in plate, charged across a field drowned in rain. Mud sucked at their horses, slowed their feet, and sapped their strength. Arrows stung, but the earth did worse, pinning them until the English finished the rout. Not the movie version. The ground itself was the deadliest weapon. Cavalry, so often crowned decisive, lived or died on terrain. Horses needed flat, dry space to gather speed. Swamps, slopes, or forests turned a proud charge into chaos. Even on open fields, stakes and pikes shattered them in seconds. Glory charges worked only when ground and timing agreed. Then came weather. Rain ruined bowstrings, wind scattered arrows, fog cloaked ambushes, snow drained energy, every breath burning your lungs. Even sunlight mattered. Commanders placed armies with dawn or dusk glaring into enemy eyes. Not the movie version, the sky itself fought. Timing sealed victories. Surprise dawn attacks caught men groggy. Dusk assaults left armies blind. Forced marches drained soldiers before the fight even began. At Lake Trasimene, Hannibal ambushed Romans in a valley, timing the strike until escape was impossible. Geography and timing, not sharper steel, doomed them. To you as a soldier, these forces were merciless. Mud clung to your legs. Rain soaked your padded armor until it doubled in weight. Mist made allies look like ghosts. Terrain and weather gnawed at you before the enemy even arrived. War was fought not on open stages but in landscapes that swallowed you whole. The greatest generals mastered this. The worst ignored it. No amount of valor undid the ground beneath your feet. Next, how battles truly ended not with victory cries, but with fear, collapse, and slaughter in the rout. Your screen shows battles ending in noble duels and heroic last stands. Not the movie version. Most battles ended in panic. Here's how they really closed. First, lines collapsed when fear spread. Then, the rout killed more than the clash. Finally, survival belonged to luck, not courage. When one formation wavered, chaos erupted. Men dropped shields, turned, and fled. Retreat was never clean. It was a stampede. Exhausted soldiers tripped, fell, and were trampled. Cavalry cut them down from behind. More died with backs exposed than with weapons raised, not the movie version. Survival was random. The man who ran early might live. The one caught in mud or trapped at a bridge died. After the rout, victors hunted stragglers like prey. Fortune, not valor, decided who returned home, and the aftermath was uglier still. Corpses rotted in fields, survivors scavenged gear and fought over food. The air stank of death for weeks. Songs and stories spoke of glory, but the ground told the truth. War was waste. To understand this is to strip away every cinematic lie. Formations, logistics, fear, and terrain-shaped combat, not heroics, not shining armor, not duels. The myths belong to movies. The reality belongs to the men who suffered it, not the movie version. And that's the point. Seeing war clearly does not dishonor soldiers, it honors them. They were not flawless warriors, but human beings enduring chaos no film can capture. Once you know this truth, you will never see a battle scene the same way again.